Tonight we find ourselves marooned in a world of foul-smelling straw, reeking ditches, and pottage so sour it practically stages a mutiny in your gut. Each morning greets you not with birdsong, but the bleating of half-starved livestock and the squeak of vermin testing your stubbornly unwashed cloak. Dirt-choked lanes serve as your daily thoroughfare, where every puddle doubles as a petri dish of God knows what. And fine dining back then meant rationing mold, encrusted broth until you felt like the Ritz compared to your neighbors. As you steel yourself for the specters of famine, Viking raids, and a day that stretches from sunrise to the moment your back gives out, know that survival was an art form. So lower the candlelight, draw your blanket tight, and, before this grim odyssey drifts you toward uneasy dreams, smash that like button and subscribe for more, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Now, let's dive in. You wake to the metallic taste of yesterday's ale still clinging to your teeth, a dubious souvenir from last night's raid on the village brewer's stash. Raw stench of damp straw assaults your nostrils before daylight even dares to creep through the cracks. Your breath mingles with the sour tang of sourdough bread gone feral, every crust a potential hazard. One sniff of the open latrine out back is all it takes to understand why hope was a luxury few could afford. Lice and fleas stage mutinies in your patched wool tunic, but at least they don't add calories. The pottage simmers in a cracked pot overhead, its moldy aroma a far cry from any modern kitchen's humble stew. You ladle a portion into a chipped wooden bowl, grimacing as the curdled broth congeals on your tongue. Each gulp slides down like a glitchy download, leaving behind a residue of bitter regret. Somewhere in the yard, a pig grunts indignantly at your fumes, proving that even livestock have standards. Despite the sensory onslaught, this is your normal, and normal means survival. Breakfast concluded. You trudge into the courtyard where filth-coated boots leave prints in every puddle. The air is thick with the tang of manure, a scent so pervasive it could be bottled and sold as a cure for faint-hearted travelers. Someone left a wheel of cheese out too long, and now it oozes toxins that would put any biohazard lab to shame. You grip your wooden trench spoon, prepared to scrape off the blackened bits before they poison your kin. A stray goat nibbles at your heel, indifferent to your plight, but excellent at testing your reflexes. The communal drinking horn is second only to the latrine in terms of public health risk. Even the act of drawing water from the well comes laced with the risk of waterborne horrors unseen. Yet, you endure because complaining earns you a free chore list that rivals a royal decree. If misery were currency, you'd be the richest serf in all of Europe. By midday, the sun offers no relief as you wade through mud that clings to every step. Sharp tang of sweat drips into your mouth, reminding you that hydration was never this culture's forte. The lords might sip spiced wine in their polished halls, but your cup brims only with disease-laden swill. Every breath tastes faintly of decay, as though the land itself has turned against you. You swallow back nausea and press on, because a full belly is a tale best left untold. Occasionally, a traveller's garb catches on a nail in the fence, releasing a puff of rot that could fell a stronger man. You've learned to hold your breath at just the right moment, turning breath control into your most practical skill. Even the simple joy of chewing yields an adventure in texture and aroma that modern sensibilities would find abhorrent. And yet you trudge on, proving resilience is less storybook ethos and more daily necessity. As dusk approaches, the pungent swirl of smoke from makeshift fires blankets the hamlet. Chunks of half-burned wood hiss and spit like embers staging their own revolt. From your hut, The aroma of roasted grain mingles with the screech of a hammock of vermin. Those who had the privilege of salt trade brag about fleeting bursts of flavor, a memory you clutch like a relic. In the dim light, stale ale becomes a prized commodity, each sip an exercise in controlled risk-taking. Even the simple comfort of a rough-hewn wooden chair carries the stench of mildew. You press your face into a clean scrap of cloth, if only cloth could purify the air. Night descends with its own bouquet of damp earth and ghostly exhalations from every nook and cranny. Believe it or not, this sensory circus is your version of home. In this realm of relentless aroma assault, each scent tells a chapter of hardship. You've become an expert at identifying fungal growth by smell alone. Mealtime has trained your nostrils to detect spoilage faster than any modern-day pressure test. Your olfactory senses have leveled up to legendary status. Congratulations. You're basically a walking gauge for rancidity. And if you ever find yourself pining for a 5-star restaurant, remember how quickly prestige can spoil. You shoulder your wooden yoke and trudge toward the manor house, where the lord's men pace like caged wolves. Their polished chainmail clangs, a symphony of authority meant to remind you who calls the shots. Each furrowed brow among the reeves signals a collection of unpaid dues hustling through your mind. At the gate, you kneel in the mud. Ritual humiliation courtesy of feudal contract. The steward's quill scratches across your ledger, tallying your meager grain tribute with merciless precision. You swallow the lump in your throat as the numbers grow, a silent prayer to any saint listening. Behind him, the Lord lounges on a carved throne, his velvet cloak a gag-inducing contrast to your patched tunic. His jeweled goblet catches the sun, a beacon of ostentatious wealth you can only dream of touching. Even in hushed whispers, the power imbalance clangs louder than the church bells. The palace gates may lie quiet, but your sense of subjugation never takes a holiday. When you rise, your spine still aches from yesterday's labor, and the Lord's glare feels like a brand. You feel his patronage and persecution intertwined, an unpredictable mix that keeps you on edge. Gossip from the reeves drips like honeyed poison, telling tales of extra tithes and secret punishments. A mist of dread coils in your gut, the same place your supper would have lodged if it hadn't been rationed. Nearby, a minstrel strums a lute, crooning about glorious conquests while you wonder when conquest became more comfortable than survival. His song inches across the courtyard, a reminder that culture can bloom anywhere, even in oppression. Yet that same culture comes at a price you pay in sweat and soul. For every tale of chivalry, there's a scapegoat serf swinging from an oak tree for a fraction of the crime. Feudal life wasn't just work. It was an ever-shifting game of favors, threats, and mistrust. And you're the pawn with the heaviest burden. On market day, you barter under the watchful eyes of tax collectors, each exchange scrutinized for extra coins. You've learned that every loaf you bake could cost you double if whispers reached the manor. Silver and secrecy go hand in hand, cloaked beneath capes and whispered deals in back alleys. A crooked merchant pockets a coin meant for the church, and you wouldn't dare speak up. The church adds your syntax to the list of your liabilities, sealing your fate with a benevolent grimace. Overheard sermons preach charity, yet your offerings vanish into the same coffers that punish your kin. Charity and coercion dance together like unwilling partners in a twisted ball. You push through the throng, each face a reminder that community is a rare luxury here. Even when you stand among neighbors, you're never truly equal. The Lord's hand shapes every relationship. When a bounty falls short, the verdict is swift. Extra days of labor, measured in sunrises and broken backs. Rumors of a nearby rebellion spread like wildfire, but fear burns hotter than hope. You weigh the risk of uprising against the certainty of your threshing schedule. The memory of past rebellions ends with stakes and pitchforks, not freedom. So you return to the fields, scalp sun-blistered and heart thudding with reluctant acceptance. A reeve's shout halves your break time, his authority drawn like a sword at your neck. You choke back protest, knowing any word could cost your family the roof over their heads. Every command is a reminder that your life is collateral for the Lord's whim. Justice here is less a balanced scale and more a forging hammer, shaped by those at the top. Dusk doesn't bring freedom, only the promise of renewed obligation tomorrow. The manor's silhouette towers, a monstrous reminder of the day's unpaid toll. You trace your fingers along a twig of barley stuck in your hair, a token of the day's yield. That tiny sprig feels heavier than the yoke across your shoulders. At last you trudge back to your hut, powerlessness stitched into every fibre of your being. You remove your boots, the leather creaking like a sigh of relief neither you nor they can sustain. Your hands tremble, marked by the ledger's scratch and the whip's echo. And despite it all, tomorrow you'll rise again, because resistance costs more than compliance. In a world where your labor buys another's luxury, even the smallest harvest feels like a small victory. Welcome to feudal life, where loyalty is bought with your backbone and sold to the highest bidder. Congrats. If you ever complain about your Monday meeting again, remember who really has the worst boss. Rough straw bites into your shoulders as you haul sacks of barley across the courtyard, each grain feeling like a bone against your skin. The wooden yoke digs into your collarbones, turning every step into a lesson in punishment. Splinters in the handle of your digging spade pry into your palms, painting them with dark lines of dried blood. Your feet, clad in crudely stitched leather, bear the unrelenting press of mud that clings like a second skin. Each boot feels 30 pounds heavier as you trudge through puddles full of rotting reeds. Your shirt, woven from coarse wool, scratches against your neck like an angry branch. The handle of the churn spins hot in your grasp, blistering the tips of your fingers as you coax rancid butter from curds. A rope halter rubs raw behind your ears when you lead oxen to pasture, its fibers fraying under tension. For a moment, you stop and press your hand to a sun-warmed stone wall, feeling its grainy surface soothe the sting of exertion. The wall's grooves trace patterns under your palm, reminding you that even rough textures can hold fleeting solace. When you bend to shore up a thatch roof, the brittle straw snaps under your calloused thumbs, each break sounding like a muted cry. Gloved hands press against oak timbers that smell of tar and years of sweat, every knot revealing a story of labor and neglect. The cold metal of a simple bucket handle numbs your fingertips as you lower it into the well's dark depths. Water sluices over your skin when you collect it, sending shivers through your arms long before you reach the hut. The thin, tanned hide of your gloves rips at the seams, leaving your knuckles grazed and aching. As you clutch a rag to wipe grime from your brow, the cloth twists against your fingers, sucking up sweat and dust. The gate's iron hinges grind against your hand as you push it open, a metallic jar that echoes through your bones. Your trousers, patched countless times, rasp against your thighs with every movement. You pause to rub your temples, feeling the rawness of skin chafed by hours of toil. The afternoon breeze carries a sting that nips at exposed arms, a reminder the elements don't cut serfs any slack. When twilight arrives, the low bench you collapse onto feels like a concrete slab under your weight. Your back arches against the wooden seat, every vertebra singing in protest as you try to sink into its unyielding surface. Braids of rope bind curtains in the manor's storage room, their rough weave promising rope burns if mishandled. You grab them anyway, tying off sacks of grain until your wrists burn with friction. The leather strap of a saddle, tossed on a barn post, presses into your hip as you lean against it. Grains of sand and straw work their way into every fold of your clothing, an omnipresent reminder of the day's hours. The final bushel of apples tumbles from your arms, its smooth rind a silky contrast to your splintered world. You roll it between your palms, relishing the fleeting luxury of sleek skin before tossing it into the barrel. Back in your hut, the rough-hewn floorboards creak as you lie down, each plank protesting under your limbs' weight. Straw shifts beneath you, jagged ends scraping across your forearm until you shift again. A thin blanket rubs across your back, its coarse texture both comfort and curse in equal measure. You clutch its fraying edge, translating every thread into a lifeline against the chill night air. Even your pillow, if you could call it that, feels like a burlap sack stuffed with broken twigs. You press your cheek into it, wincing as wood pricks find tender skin. A lantern's hot metal casing radiates brief warmth against your fingertips when you lift it to peer at the dark corners. Sparks of heat trail along your palm, a welcome jolt of sensation after hours of dull aches. Your eyelids grow heavy, the roughness of your world finally slipping into the fuzz of exhaustion. Every texture you've endured seems to soften as you drift, your mind craving smooth dreams instead. Soon, only the memory of rough straw and splintered wood remains, fading beneath the weight of sleep. And if surf slumber isn't enough to knock you out, at least your morning wake-up call tomorrow will be a grumpy rooster, not a buzzing phone. At dawn on the 24th of August, 410 AD, the grand silhouette of Rome's battered walls stood silent before the looming horde of Visigoth warriors. The city, long famed for its marble temples and triumphant arches, felt muted under the weight of dwindling legions and fraying morale. Alaric, once a foil and ally of Rome, now led his forces with the determined precision of a strategist long denied proper recognition. His cavalry's hooves beat a rhythmic dirge upon the Appian Way, heralding a fall that would echo through millennia. Civic leaders, clad in opulent purple togas, huddled in Senate chambers, their speeches unraveling like fraying scrolls. Citizens peered from shuttered windows as the standard-bearers passed, their banners battered by neglect. The Senate's last decrees read more as elegies to lost glory than directives for defense. One well-placed volley of flaming arrows turned rooftops into smoky altars, offering sacrifice to the gods of oblivion. In that moment, the city's famed aqueducts, once arteries of abundance, murmured in hollow protest. The population trembled, not from fear alone, but from the realization that empire and illusion were dangerously intertwined. Even as chaos reigned, whispers of civic resilience fluttered through alleyways like fragile moths against a harsh breeze. The memory of earlier triumphs clung to every crumbling column, lending grace to the ruin. A handful of devoted scribes in the forum labored by candlelight, preserving annals that the conflagration threatened to erase. Their ink-stained fingers moved with deliberate care, each stroke a gentle defiance against the erasure of memory. A scholarly undertone softened the clamor of siege drums, reminding onlookers that knowledge can flicker even in darkness. Meanwhile, relics of past emperors lay buried beneath rubble, like time capsules awaiting rediscovery. Archaeologists centuries later would marvel at fragments of mosaic, shimmering with stories of triumph now half forgotten. those colourful tesserae whispered tales of lavish banquets and civic pageantry, stark against the backdrop of pillaged granaries. The great basilicas, once resonating with divine chants, tasted the acrid echo of violence, yet ceded only reluctantly to ruin. A lone scholar later described the fall as a system crash, a security breach that reopened vulnerability across the Western realms. As smoke curled above Tiber's banks, ambassadors from neighbouring realms watched with cautious interest. Some saw opportunity in Rome's decline, while others mourned the loss of a stabilizing force. The dance of power shifted under silent negotiations in dimly lit chambers, treaties inked by candle flame. Each stipulation carried the weight of lives dependent on its fragile enactment. Diplomats traded veiled threats as though they were coins, testing the limits of reciprocal desperation. The machinery of influence spun onward even as the empire's core quivered. A reluctant bishop offered sanctuary to displaced senators, his cathedral doubling as a refuge for fragile hopes. Beneath vaulted ceilings, prayers wove through cracks in the stone, seeking solace amid the uproar. And yet, for all the piety, the political undercurrents moved with the precision of well-oiled gears. Alaric himself weighed tribute against conquest, his ambitions tempered by pragmatic calculations. Ultimately, the Visigoths marched into the city with a measured reverence for its splendor, plundering what remained while sparing fragile icons. The symbolic act of entering Rome signaled a tectonic shift, an admission that the old guard no longer held sway. Chroniclers noted the subdued chanting of psalms amid the sack, hinting at a transition where faith outlasted imperial might. Gold and silver found new custodians among Gothic chiefs, their warfare trophies soon repurposed into brooches and chalices. The Pantheon stood battered but upright, its steadfast dome a quiet testament to durability in collapse. Even in its wounded state, the city's skeletal grandeur invited the next wave of builders and dreamers. In the centuries to come, Rome's fall would inspire a mosaic of reinvention, from monasteries clinging to classical texts to Byzantine echoes in far-off courts. The sack of 410 was less a final curtain than an overture to transformation. Today, historians reflect on that event, not with sensational dread, but with an understanding that endings concede new beginnings. And in those reflections, the notion of a dark ages softens into a continuum of change rather than an abrupt void. That evening, as embers cooled along the charred rooftops, Rome stood humbled yet hauntingly alive. Its story, written in smoke and stone, would outlast empires built on the promise of unending dominion. In the months following the siege, Emperor Honorius retreated to the marshy security of Ravenna, exchanging Rome's opulent marble for soggy battlements and rhythmic rituals. The imperial court, once a tapestry of Senate debates and triumphal parades, now resembled a group chat stuck on infinite buffering, messages of loyalty stalled by distance and distrust. Honorius, notorious for his indecision, consulted ministers whose whispers carried more weight than any formal decree. Bishops stepped into the void, their eloquent sermons offering hope when the state's infrastructure faltered under bureaucratic paralysis. Carpentry guilds and waterway engineers found their drafts abandoned, replaced by hastily erected fortifications around provincial hubs. In former Roman provinces, local warlords, once dispatched as frontier guardians, began minting their own coinage, a silent testament to fractured allegiance. These iron-wielding magnates wove fealty pacts with communities desperate for protection against roving bands of mercenaries. Meanwhile, the Christian Church emerged as a stable network, delivering grain distributions and rudimentary law where civic order collapsed. Even in the haze of governance breakdown, lanterns burned at cathedrals like beacons guiding a wandering populace. A sense of communal solace slowly replaced the rigid identity of citizen and subject. Rural estates transformed into semi-autonomous enclaves, their landowners pledging loyalty not to distant emperors but to bishops who dispensed both spiritual counsel and grain rations. Manor courts adjudicated disputes once reserved for Roman praetors, blending ecclesiastical mercy with pragmatic compromise. Inscriptions in provincial basilicas record property transfers sealed with both wax and cross, symbolizing a fusion of secular and sacred authority. Scholars later noted that this patchwork governance resembled a lo-fi patching of corroded circuits, where each node operated on its own voltage. The elegant bureaucracy of old Rome faded like a half-erased fresco, leaving jagged edges of local custom and self-preservation. In Gallo-Roman Gaul, counts assumed roles as de facto governors, their narrow villas surveying acres that once answered directly to the Caesars. News travelled by horseback and whispered caravans, each relay station a fragile link in a chain stretched perilously thin. The absence of a central ledger made records unreliable, forcing communities to rely on oral traditions and symbolic tokens. In the absence of standardized records, villagers gathered around hearths to recount charters and pacts, forging unity through shared storytelling. This oral tapestry became as valuable to survival as any imperial statute once etched in marble. By mid-century, Merovingian Frankish kings claimed Roman heritage, styling themselves as heirs to ancient legacies, even as they wielded swords with little regard for senatorial protocol. Their courts buzzed with itinerant poets who preserved epic verses, a cultural lifeline wrapped in alliterative verse. In Ravenna, mosaics gleamed beneath basilica domes, silent witnesses to the evolving relationship between church and crown. Ambassadors exchanged ornate reliquaries rather than platitudinous treaties, signaling priorities rooted in sanctity over sword swings. This shift wasn't abrupt but resembled the slow fade of a wall painting, every layer of plaster adding nuance to the developing scene. Meanwhile, in Hispania, Visigothic laws were codified to protect church lands, intertwining divine decree with civic responsibility. Bishops held public grain distributions paired with sermons on charity, cementing their role as community anchors. Over time, the image of the lone orator in toga gave way to the robed cleric, dispensing both absolution and alms. By century's end, power had diffused into a constellation of bishops, counts, and tribal chieftains, each maintaining order within their own fiefdoms. The distant hum of imperial authority grew faint, replaced by the murmur of parish councils and fortified keep announcements. Emperor Honorius's death in 423 AD triggered succession squabbles more reminiscent of clan politics than grand ceremonies. Pretenders and puppets emerged, each backed by shifting alliances of Goths, Huns, and Roman elites. The vast aqueduct networks fell into disrepair, their arches collapsing like silent monuments to fractured unity. Water shortages forced towns to rely on wells guarded by local militias, repurposing civic health into strategic assets. In North Africa, Vandal fleets prowled the Mediterranean, their raids severing vital grain routes that once sustained millions. Carthaginian granaries fell under foreign banners, transforming bread baskets into battlegrounds for supply security. Back in Rome, the Curia mansions stood abandoned, their frescoes flaking under silent skies. Only the faithful kept vigil in basilicas, where the glow of candlelight offered reassurance when empires offered none. A lone archdeacon recorded the ebbing of secular power with measured tones, describing a world where faith stitched societies back together. His chronicle framed the so-called Dark Ages as a recalibration rather than a collapse, hinting at resilience woven into the cracks of failing stone. Later historians argued that this era's mosaic of governance, church oligarchies, tribal confederations, and isolated enclaves laid the groundwork for medieval Europe's intricate tapestry. They noted that local councils often handled disputes with surprising fairness, absent the red tape and corruption of Rome's imperial judiciary. Manuscript illuminations from secluded abbeys reveal that artistic expression flowered even as urban centers decayed. The emergence of scriptoria turned monasteries into intellectual strongholds, preserving classical knowledge beneath monastic silence. This shift illustrated that power sometimes thrives away from grand palaces, shaping a world where community bonds outlasted marble columns. When news of the sack reached distant courts, chronicles spread faster than any legion ever could. The shock of Rome's humiliation resonated through handwritten letters and royal missives alike. Figures like Cassiodorus lamented a dictatorship of oblivion, framing the event as a cosmic fracture. Boethius's consolation wove justice and faith into a tapestry of reflection amid unraveling traditions. Their philosophical dialogues echoed in monastic cells, offering both warning and hope. Marginal notes in later medieval manuscripts immortalized 410 AD as the moment civilization stumbled. Scribes revered these texts, convinced that every lost page signaled another drift into darkness. Over time, the phrase Dark Ages slipped into common parlance as shorthand for decline. The term's resonance rattled through chapel walls and fortress gates alike. Copying classical works became an act of rebellion against an invisible night. Renaissance humanists hurled Dark Ages at their medieval predecessors, boasting their own revival. Archaeologists centuries later challenged that binary by unearthing vibrant intellectual hubs. Discoveries of Isidore's encyclopedias and Bede's histories complicated the narrative of stagnation. Coin hoards proved that trade routes pulsed with life, carrying silk and spices across shattered realms. Illuminated manuscripts shimmered with hybrid artistry, blending Christian iconography and classical motifs. Rural smithies forged intricate metalwork, a testament to skills that never truly vanished. Every shard of pottery and fragment of mosaic whispered continuity rather than collapse. These tangible traces chipped away at the myth of unbroken gloom. In reality, the era functioned more like a laboratory of adaptation than a void of creativity. Communities patched fraying infrastructures by merging Roman techniques with local know-how. Modern scholars now favor early Middle Ages to capture the era's layered complexity. They spotlight how monastic scriptoria preserved classical learning while nurturing new theology. Regional councils blended Roman law with tribal customs to forge nascent legal codes. Vernacular dialects took shape, sowing seeds for future national languages. Cross-cultural networks linked Volga traders, Frankish envoys, and Islamic scholars in scholarly exchange. These interactions underscored a dynamic world alive with curiosity and trade. The long shadow of Rome's fall proved less a blackout than a filtering light. Resilience wove its way through stone walls, parchments, and oral traditions. Periods of crisis often spark bursts of innovation rather than choke them. Darkness, in this sense, became a canvas for invention, if someone dared to sketch. Ottonian artists and insular monks painted their own defiance onto that canvas. Manuscript illuminations glowed with fresh color, declaring that creativity thrives in transition. Compact geometries and intricate interlaces emerged as hallmarks of a new aesthetic. They distilled centuries of classical technique into something both familiar and entirely novel. Each brushstroke and inked swirl marked a step toward Europe's next Renaissance. Even labels born of fear loosened their grasp under the light of fresh discovery. Historians re-evaluate the period as one of transformation rather than abyss. As understanding deepens, the Dark Ages label fractures into countless threads of change. That realization itself stands as proof that shadows cannot hold forever. Guess darkness was mostly a dramatic marketing tagline in the grand sweep of history. Candlelight trembled against rough stone walls, casting elongated shadows that seemed to cling to the coarse texture of every chipped surface. The monk's fingertips brushed against the cold iron clasps, securing a treasure of recalcitrant vellum, each clasp a tiny fortress barricading fragile knowledge. A manuscript slid from a battered wooden shelf with the reluctant hiss of centuries-old paper resisting the pull, the scent of aged hide drifting through the chamber. Beneath calloused hands, the parchment grain coarsened like woven fabric, inviting a quiet reverence for the humble sheep whose skin had become this silent storyteller. Nearby, a stone basin held water flecked with ink, and the cool droplets dotted tattered edges, reminding the scribe of every drop's precious cost. The scriptorium's floor, strewn with stray shavings of reed pens and broken quill fragments, offered a gritty carpet of creative debris under every weighted step. As the monk leaned forward, the rough-hewn desk gouged the back of his elbow, imprinting a subtle ache that anchored him to the repetitive act of preservation. Each turn of a page released a feather-light cloud of dust, floating like miniature ghosts before settling on a leather-bound tome as though marking it for eternity. In that hushed hush, the soft scrape of stylus against page felt important, an analog affirmation that ideas could outlive empires. In these half-lit sanctuaries, the simple act of pressing quill to parchment became a tactile meditation, a bridge between hand and memory carved into every crease and fold. The quill's nib bit into the parchment with a deliberate resistance, its protest a reminder that ink spilled here could alter history's fragile ledger. Against the uneven groove of desk planks, the sharp quill tip traced characters that once braided reason and myth into a single narrative strand. Fingers pressed parchment into place, feeling the slight give of layered fibers under their weight as the scribe prepared to resurrect a snippet of Cicero's rhetoric. An iron torch bracket rattled softly on the earthen wall as hands reached for a fresh scroll, the metal's chill singing against the worn leather binding. The texture of imported vellum, thinner yet more resilient than local alternatives, felt velvety beneath a careful fingertip, a small luxury in a bare chamberscape. A solitary tech joke flickered in the margin of his mind. This was no touchscreen interface, but more like unzipping a massive archive with a feather and a fervent prayer. Beneath the monk's threadbare robe, the drafty air etched goosebumps across his forearms, a tactile reminder that comfort was a privilege rarely afforded here. The thud of a falling tome sent a tremor through the wooden bench, eliciting a faint echo that vibrated against every board and beam. Tightening his grasp, the scribe felt the manuscript's weight shift, an unspoken partnership between human patience and ancient material. In these small gestures, pressing, lifting, turning, the scriptorium revealed its true tapestry, woven not of threads but of touch and tenacity. A cracked leather fingerstall protected his index from abrasions, its smooth interior contrasting sharply with the rough ink-stained exterior. The spine of an uncatalogued codex offered a subtle resistance when flexed, as though it contested any attempt to pry open its secrets. Dust motes the size of dots on a page floated lazily in torchlight, settling into the soft indentations carved by centuries of marginalia. Underneath the coarse wooden grating, a hidden compartment creaked open, revealing rolled fragments of Latin verse tied with fraying twine. The twine's fibers rasped against the monk's palm, each strand promising a thread back to the intellectual loom of antiquity. As he unfurled a fragile fragment, the parchment crackled softly, its surface resisting separation in a tactile ballet of strain and release. Embossed covers, once gilded with gold leaf, had long since dulled, yet vestiges of raised patterns offered a tactile map of early artistry. The monk leaned closer, resting the fragment on his wrist to gauge its weight and texture, comparing it to a moth's delicate wing. Beneath his fingernail, a sliver of ink lodged in the skin, a persistent souvenir of every painstaking stroke. Every quiver of finger and brush of thread whispered of laborious devotion, each manuscript a tapestry of touch imprinted with devotion's fingerprint. The scent of beeswax polish, used to condition leather bindings, lingered faintly beneath layers of must and mortar. Hands coated in residual wax captured the faint grain of calfskin bindings, reinforcing the bond between artisan and artifact. A gentle tremor ran through his palm as he lifted a slate stylus, its metal tip cold and unyielding against flesh. Brushes fashioned from boar bristles lay idle beside ink pots, their stiff strands stiffening under centuries of abandonment. Each tactile encounter revealed the manuscript's provenance. Rough-hewn scribbles from distant abbeys, smoother inscriptions from royal scriptoria. As candle wax pooled in a chipped holder, its hardened surface peeled in translucent shards under a fingernail, reminiscent of peeling protective layers from a relic. The chamber's stone walls absorbed every sigh, every scratch of pen, anchoring the tactile symphony within unmoving granite. He traced the raised ridges of faded rubrication, relishing the slight pinch of his fingertip against hardened pigments. A soft exhalation accompanied the turn of a particularly brittle leaf, its crack echoing through the cavernous room. With each shift of parchment and metal, the act of unearthing lost lore became a sensory pilgrimage across time's textured layers. A rusted thumb clasp echoed as it swung open, revealing margins filled with vanished ink outlines and ghosted glosses. The monastery's apprentice, guided by carved stone corbels supporting a narrow ledge, extended his arm to retrieve a long-forgotten gloss. The gloss's brittle edges yielded under thumb pressure, as if conceding that some knowledge, once sealed, would find its way back to light. In the hush that followed, the tactile cadence of preservation felt more profound than any spoken sermon. Fingers lingered on a faint watermark pressed between leaves, marveling at craftsmanship hidden beneath the manuscript's surface. Who would have guessed that the real breakthroughs were measured not in ink, but in the gentle press of a fingertip against history's pages? Even in total darkness, a well-worn manuscript has a way of feeling surprisingly enlightening. Moss-slick stones formed the threshold of the abandoned Bobbio Library ruins. A light breeze stirred loose fragments of roof tile, swirling them across the earthen floor like confetti of neglect. The trowel's metal edge bit softly into compacted soil, leaving behind neat furrows that hinted at hidden foundations. Each brushstroke across exposed tile revealed faint impressions of carved lettering, whispering secrets of architecture long forgotten. Broken roof beams lay in gentle disarray, their splintered wood fibers rising in soft spikes that invited a curious caress yet warned of splinters. At Jarrow's monastic site, fragments of chalked diagrams surfaced beneath layers of silt, their chalky residue clinging to sculpted stone. Excavators' hands felt the smooth curves of chipped capitals, edges rounded by centuries of wind and time. A cluster of shattered ceramic bowl shards lay in a muted mosaic, their sharp edges dulled by constant ground pressure. Beneath scattered stones, a shallow groove marked the path of a former bookshelf's support, a subtle indentation born of gravity's slow insistence. In these silent excavations, every brush and scrape pieces together a story written not in ink, but in the language of texture and trace. Faint sunbeams filtered through fractured arches, illuminating motes that danced above an unmarked grave of vellum scraps. Beneath a collapsed arch, pale fragments of palimpsest lay in ordered arrays, their faint text teasing glimpses of overwritten lore. Every fragment bore the imprint of a scribe's hand, roughened by repeated scraping and rewriting. Loose mortar crumbled between fingers, its gritty texture serving as tangible proof of centuries-long decay. Parchment leftovers, stained with iron gall ink, curled slightly at the edges, forming miniature parchment scrolls in the soil. A gentle tap against a hidden timber post released a hollow echo, hinting at voids once filled with shelves of knowledge. Archaeologists knelt, fingertips brushing dust from a carved lintel, revealing smooth lettering preserved beneath a veneer of mineral deposits. A stray oak leaf, pressed flat against a collapsed beam, offered an organic snapshot of a single autumn long past. The rhythmic scraping of trowel blade on stone brought new features into focus, each stroke a quiet hymn to discovery. With every careful uncovering, the silent stones of Bobbio and Jarrow divulged their testimonies in tactile detail rather than spoken word. Shell fragments from discarded amphorae whispered of trade routes and daily sustenance, long since dissipated. Underfoot, pressed fragments of charcoal bore the imprint of incense burners used in once hallowed halls. Carved stone gargoyles peeked from rubble, their weathered faces conveying both guardianship and abandonment. A single copper nail, verdigris encrusted, glinted in torchlight like a fragment of forgotten artistry. The brush's bristles swept across layered ash, exposing delicate etchings that hinted at marginal annotations. Hands lifted a half-buried inkpot, its rim chipped, yet still capable of tracing letters in sludge. Nearby, fragments of parchment ribbon peeked from earth, their silky texture belying the dusty embrace. A steady drip of groundwater tapped against stone flooring, each drop etching minuscule channels into soft limestone. Excavation grids stretched out in precise symmetry, a human counterpoint to the random dispersal of ancient debris. In these methodical grids and measured strokes, modern precision met medieval chaos, revealing a dialogue across epochs. Faint scorch marks around a collapsed hearth spoke to hurried fires once lit for warmth and cooking. Slices of terracotta piping, glazed in muted ochre, lay amid broken tiles like relics of a bygone plumbing system. Scribes' benches, now reduced to fragmentary beams, showcased their carved dovetail joints with proud, weathered grace. The tip of a rusted stylus emerged from soil, its once sharp point now rounded by ages of corrosion. Beneath a collapsed wall, fragments of coloured plaster hinted at frescoes that might have once brightened the scriptorium's gloom. Fingers traced the subtle ridges of medieval masonry, running along grooves left by chisel and mallet. Even the faint imprint of a monk's sandals on compacted ground evoked the steady rhythm of daily routine. A solitary bronze buckle, its design simple yet elegant, lay nestled in moss, a small treasure awaiting recognition. As the sun dipped lower, the exposed surfaces cooled, the stone's warmth fading under the encroaching chill. When daylight waned and shadows stretched, the tactile richness of these sites seemed even more profound, as if the earth itself held its breath. Excavators recorded every detail in leather-bound journals, the worn covers soft to the touch from years of handling. Each sketch of a discovered artifact carried the weight of careful observation, translating texture into line and shade. A discarded bone awl, slender and smooth, suggested craft activities that once echoed through these silent halls. The gentle hum of distant machinery contrasted with the silent testimony of earthen fragments uncovered by patient hands. Hands carefully wrapped fragile finds in cloth, the fabric's weave protecting brittle edges from further harm. In the hushed calm of the dusk-lit site, every tactile discovery felt like an embrace across centuries. Notes scrawled on parchment, scraps lay beside modern field guides, bridging ancient technique and contemporary inquiry. And as the final shovel load was lifted, the site exhaled centuries of silence, leaving only tactile echoes in its wake. It turns out that sometimes the heaviest thing uncovered is the weight of time itself. Narrow trenches at a Normandy dig revealed pale streaks of mortar where a medieval chapel once stood. Beneath a thin layer of topsoil, glints of bronze fragments signaled the survival of a 9th century brooch, its curved pin still remarkably intact. Archaeologists gingerly lifted the brooch on a padded board, the cool metal surprisingly smooth against their gloved fingertips. Nearby, a fragment of manuscript inscribed with Tacitus's hand lay curled in a wooden box, its inked letters retaining a soft ridged texture beneath delicate palms. The fragment's edges felt papery yet firm, like an ancient leaf pressed between cold glass. A modern laser scanner hummed over the surface, mapping every crease and groove in high definition before the piece returned to its protective cradle. Fragments of graffiti scratched into chapel walls whispered of anonymous scribes, their words faintly raised, a braille of centuries-old angst and devotion. Lime-washed dust sifted over each carved letter, softening the contours until careful brushing revealed sharp incisions once made by rusted nails. In this interplay of digital precision and patient handwork, old and new methods converged to resurrect lost voices. A handheld mirror reflected torchlight into shadowed alcoves, illuminating faded fresco outlines that resisted casual recognition. The fresco's surface felt slightly grainy under a fingertip dipped in cotton swab, each swirl of pigment offering a tactile bridge to vanished artistry. Micro-excavation tools, no thicker than a dental pick, chipped away at encrusted lime, yielding delicate tesserae that tumbled like tiny jewels into a canvas-lined tray. Under low-angle lighting, the tesserae's glassy faces caught every spark, their edges crisp and unyielding. A conservationist's brush, its bristles softer than a moth's wing, swept away residual grit to reveal a pattern of interlaced vines beneath the saint's halo. The vines' carved grooves felt shallow but distinct, as though the original sculptor had used a fine stylus. In a nearby lab, a fragment of colored glass underwent spectrometry. Its surface, once frosted by centuries, gleamed when polished with micro-abrasive paste. Researchers marveled at the way light refracted through the fragment, reminding them that beauty can endure even beneath layers of neglect. The quiet echo of these textures underscored how material traces could rewrite entire chapters of history. A shattered reliquary lid lay in pieces on a padded table, its silver filigree still warm from the gentle rays of an east-facing window. Each filigree strand felt springy beneath gloved pressure, as though it still remembered the artisan's hand that shaped it. Encased beneath layers of verdigris, a fragment of inscribed Latin peeked through, its letters raised like braille on a relic's underbelly. Restorers applied tiny droplets of solvent to soften corrosion, the surface pulsing faintly as oxidation yielded to modern chemistry. A magnifying loupe revealed microscopic chisel marks, fingerprints of a smith long vanished into history. At a separate site in Bavaria, shards of earthenware revealed faint fingerprints embedded in the clay, a palimpsest of hands at the potter's wheel. The clay's texture varied from smooth rims to gritty bases, each transition telling a story of kiln heat and hands-shaping form. Beneath the shards, soil samples carried the scent of peat and moss, a muted aroma preserved in buried layers. In every tactile discovery, the boundary between observer and artifact grew impossibly thin. Infrared photography coaxed hidden drawings onto digital screens, the waxy surface of parchment glowing under false light. Scrolling through high-res captures, scholars noted subtle indentations where a quill had once paused. The paper's memory of movement palpable even centuries later. A micro-drill gently bored into rock to extract fossilized pollen grains. Each extracted grain a tiny orb of hardened history. When placed beneath a scanning electron microscope, the grain's surface revealed textures so minute they rivaled lunar craters. Mounting the sample on a pin required the steadiest hand. Any slip could shatter the fragile time capsule. Nearby, samples of plaster from a collapsed arch were soaked in consolidation resin, the once powdery surface taking on a subtle sheen under careful application. Conservators marveled as the resin's polymer matrix bound loose granules, restoring the plaster's original solidity. A final tactile test, a gentle prod with a camel hair brush, confirmed the treated section would endure handling. With each microscopic texture laid bare, our understanding of the Dark Ages deepened in the subtlest of ways. A library cat's soft paw prints, fossilized in a muddy courtyard in Rouen, hinted at the animal companions that shared these sacred spaces. The print's pad impressions contrasted starkly with human boot treads, a small reminder of everyday life peeking through grand narratives. Fragments of leather sandals lifted from an excavation carried the faint imprint of compressed straw mats, as though whispering the traveller's last steps. Each sole's wear pattern suggested a habitual limp, a tactile biography etched with every journey between scriptorium and granary. In Stockholm, a tiny bookmark carved from bone revealed the reader's tactile negotiation with heavy codices. The bookmark's grooves matched the spine curve, testament to a centuries-old ergonomic tweak now rediscovered. Even the slight stickiness of aged adhesive, used for past repairs, offered insight into early conservation efforts, chances and errors preserved in every touch. When all fragments were catalogued, they assembled into a mosaic of textured testimonies, a tactile atlas of forgotten intellect. Who knew that getting your hands dirty might actually be the cleanest way to uncover the past? In the flickering torchlight of Charlemagne's great hall, a long oak table groans under the weight of gilded platters brimming with roasted boar and perfumed breads. The scent of spiced honey and wine vapours drifts through vaulted ceilings, mingling with distant echoes of lute strings in the marble corridor. Slivers of candied fruit stick to chipped porcelain, offering a fleeting sweetness that contrasts the stale damp of stone walls. Trays of buttery scones, dusted with sugar, sit alongside honeyed almonds, luxuries procured at the expense of countless peasants' sweat. Cress and saffron stew simmers in a bronze cauldron, its aroma teasing the nose with earthy warmth and ancient recipes reborn. Mounds of salted fish, packed in oil, glint like metallic jewels before the lords, while the undercooked entrails of small game remain the court cook's second-string option. Aromatic herbs, rosemary, thyme, and mint are strewn atop platters, their sharp fragrances cutting through richer notes. Every bite seems infused with an invisible thread of power, reminding observers that palate and politics often march hand in hand. A hush descends over the assembled nobles, their murmured contentment serving as a quiet testament to privilege. In that brief pause, the world beyond Aachen's walls feels suspended, its troubles momentarily muted by savoury indulgence. Against this hedonistic tableau, the gentle flicker of silver censers releases incense that cloaks the hall in a mystical haze. Perfumed gloves rest beside chalices of mulled wine, their owners trading warm greetings in hushed tones. The air shimmers with candle heat so dense, it nearly tastes sweet on the tongue. A gentle breeze from an open window carries a whiff of damp ivy from the palace gardens, underscoring the contrast between cultivated grandeur and wild growth. The kitchen's warm tile floor radiates heat upwards, infusing ankles with a comforting glow. Servants glide silently, balancing trays and refilling goblets before thirst can claim a single noble. For an idle moment, one might almost forget this realm teeters on the brink of chaos. Yet before that thought can settle, a distant trumpet interrupts the reverie, reminding all that spectacle and sovereignty demand constant performance. The feast resumes with renewed intensity, every clink of goblet and soft laugh, a calculated note in the evening's choreography. This interlude of sweetness and scent becomes a subtle assertion of hierarchy, teaching guests to savor both flavor and favor. Beneath a canopy of jeweled tapestries, courtiers sip from ornate goblets crafted by the empire's finest silversmiths. The pale glow of torches dances across polished shields hung as trophies, lending martial gravitas to the indulgence. Platters of roasted dormouse, a delicacy reserved for the inner circle, vanish within heartbeats, leaving echoes of whispered desire. Fresh figs from the emperor's own orchard arrive, escorted by guards, their honeyed flesh a symbol of cultivated excess. Each bite of candied citrus rind carries the distant sun of Mediterranean groves into the cool Frankish night. Seated on his raised dais, Charlemagne surveys the scene with serene detachment, his presence lending gravity to every flavour. Beneath his velvet robes lingers a hint of sandalwood, chosen to complement the banquet's richer spices. Advisors exchange covert glances, mindful that alliances are often first sealed over shared morsels. Outside the feast's glow, whispered rumours swirl like fine dust, pointing to rivalries simmering beneath courtly smiles. Within these walls, taste becomes diplomacy, and scent the silent language of influence. A servant's footfall on flagstones rings faintly, the only reminder that this fragrant oasis rests upon foundations of power. Candles gutter gently, their smoke curling toward vaulted archways as if seeking blessings from saints painted high above. The soft murmur of conversation shifts to speculation about distant campaigns, each tone measured to mask ambition. In this environment, every aroma is a statement, every flavour a proposition of strength or submission. Yet for all its sensory opulence, the feast carries an edge. Gloved hands tremble when an unexpected guest appears. A misplaced comment can sour the sweetest spiced wine, instantly altering the room's delicate balance. Around the hall's perimeter, peacocks on painted shields seem to observe proceedings with indifferent splendour. Their feathered likenesses offer a silent commentary on the spectacle's extravagant artifice. At the feast's end, The lingering perfumes coalesce into a memory both comforting and unsettling. In these vaulted chambers, every taste and every breath whispers of privilege, power, and the ever-present tension beneath gilded veneer. The final notes of lute music drift away as the assembly disperses, their senses dulled by surplus. Servants begin their quiet clean-up, guided only by smudged torchlight and dusty echoes. Charlemagne retreats to his private chambers, leaving behind a hall saturated with luxury's residue. And beneath that lingering sweetness lies the bitter reminder that, for most, such abundance is but a fleeting, intoxicating dream, served cold. High-born clans vie for seats closest to Charlemagne, their gentle gestures laden with unspoken claims. Each nod and curtained glance conveys alliances forming in whispered subtexts. The Duke of Bavaria leans toward a Frankish margrave, sharing confidences about border skirmishes. A whispered exchange over pipeweed smolders, with covert support for rival claimants. Underneath embroidered surcoats, hidden pouches contain sealed letters that could topple dukedoms. Ministers calibrate their laughter at subtle barbs, testing loyalty with barbed compliments. A chamberlain professes devotion while tallying favours owed in a ledger of gratitude. Every compliment wrapped in flattery conceals a sharper motive for courtly advancement. This delicate dance of influence underscores how power often pulses beneath courteous courtesy, an invisible current that guides every handshake. Seats at the table are as precarious as thrones themselves, shifting when trust wanes. A misread glance can unravel months of delicate negotiation. Courtiers measure each word against the shifting tides of favour. They exchange secret signals, a carefully raised eyebrow or the faintest smile as markers of priority. Envoys from distant realms navigate this maze with trembling deference. Gifts of spiced wax seals and golden embroidery serve as silent pledges of fealty. Titles are offered in passing, their true cost paid in lifelong obligations. A lord's raised goblet signals approval. A lowered one can doom a hopeful applicant. Beneath measured pleasantries, ambitions swirl like storm clouds unsummoned. The court's harmony hinges on a delicate choreography of trust and suspicion. One misstep threatens the entire dance. In the emperor's shadow, lesser potentates sharpen their wits to survive. Secret meetings convene in candlelit alcoves beyond the hall's glare. Scrolls bearing promises and threats circulate under the cloaks of trusted emissaries. Councillors in horn-rimmed spectacles pore over maps that redraw borders at a quill's whim. Petitions stack in silent piles, their petitioners hoping for favour in a system that seldom grants grace. A bishop's blessing can bolster a baron's claim as much as any battle won. Blacksmiths craft seals, so intricate they become symbols of inviolable trust. Dueling ideas of inheritance and patronage compete for the emperor's final signature. When word arrives of a rival's treachery, the court's mood tilts toward cautious vigilance. Each layered intrigue reinforces that, here, loyalty is currency and suspicion the ever-present toll booth. Envoys retire to plush chambers to decipher the evening's subtle lessons. Their midnight discussions shape the day's destinies before dawn's first sigh. Wordsmiths draft decrees whose phrasing can sway alliances for generations. The emperor's seal, pressed into warm wax, becomes a binding contract for fortunes. Noble families preserve whispered legacies in ancestral halls lined with portraits. Statues of forebears loom over corridors, their carved faces bearing silent witness to courtly gambits. A single miswritten clause in a treaty can ignite feuds that endure decades. Advisors counsel caution, reminding rulers that words once spoken cannot be recalled. In these corridors of power, victory is often claimed by those who speak softest and wait longest. With every subtle exchange, the court reaffirms that might may command armies, but words and whispers steer the wheel of empire. As dawn approaches, tents of envoy camps dissolve into empty air, leaving only the echo of last night's negotiations. Chairs stand abandoned, their cushions still warm from hurried retreat. Courtiers emerge in simple robes, bearing fresh mandates and cautious smiles. Parchment scrolls, rolled tight, slip into satchels destined for distant halls of power. The empire's machinery grinds forward, its gears oiled by whispered promises and silent threats. In this realm, the softest voice can command armies, and a whispered doubt can topple dynasties. Ambition wears velvet sleeves and drips honeyed words, hiding the steel within. One court's hush can echo louder than any battlefield's roar. After all, in the grand strategy of power, it's often the quiet moves that prove deadliest. Silk banners drape from carved beams, their threads shimmering in candlelight. Velvet drapes fall in heavy folds, pressing gently against cold stone. The emperor's tunic, woven from dyed wool, brushes against the shoulder of his throne. Beneath it, chainmail glints faintly, each interlocked ring a silent echo of past conquests. Furnished stools bear cushions stuffed with down, compressing softly under noble weight. Furs line window seats, their pelts dense and warm against draughty sconces. A silk purse, embroidered with gold thread, feels smooth between gloved fingers. Even the marble floor carries an underlying chill, reminding guests of the realm's hard edges. Every tactile choice here marks status. Sumptuous textiles softened by quiet power, cold stone underscoring unyielding authority. A knight's boot, polished leather stiff with resin, scuffs lightly against flagstones. Gauntleted palms rest on carved armrests, the iron trim biting into supple leather gloves. Velvet hose constricts at knees, a gentle pressure that whispers of station. Fine silk shirts rustle softly when courtiers shift position, their movements both graceful and constrained. Goblets of embossed silver leave cool imprints on fingertips before warming in hand. Cloaks clasped with jeweled brooches weigh heavily, their metal glinting under flickering torchlight. The weight of office hangs literally on the shoulders of crowned princes wearing heavy mantles. Embroidered floor cushions flatten in silent protest under repeated kneeling. In this realm, every texture is a lesson in hierarchy, comfort calibrated to reinforce one's place. The emperor runs a finger along the carved lion on his throne, grooves worn smooth by decades of rule. Gemstones embedded in scepters catch light, their hardness cold to the touch. A wax-sealed scroll, its paper brittle, cracks faintly as it's unfurled. Leather-bound tomes nestle in shelves, their spines stiff with unyielding boards. Tapestries, heavy with wool, mute the echoes of distant halls. Curtains of linen sway with draughts, their whisper recalling the world beyond. Rings of enamel and gold slip over gloved digits, cool and impenetrable. The steel clasps of a travelling chest snag briefly on velvet linings. Here, sensation is ceremony. Each texture an unspoken decree of power. Guards in polished cuirasses shift in unison, metal plates clinking as they adjust stance. The smooth curve of a lance shaft, carved from seasoned ash, invites respectful touch. Helmets rest on velvet pillows, their leather liners stiff and unfamiliar. Gauntlets squeak faintly at the joints, reminders of rigid protocol. A silk-lined throne creaks under the emperor's weight, the the fabric sighing in relief. Swords in tooled leather scabbards feel cool but reassuring at hip. Bronze door handles warm in repeated contact, their worn contours familiar. Floor tiles, polished by countless processions, gleam with quiet pride. Comfort here isn't casual, it's codified. Beneath a woolen cloak, the hidden heft of a dagger's hilt presses into the ribs. Silk ribbons binding treaties flutter with the slightest breeze. Coarse twine of ledger bindings scratches against velvet pouches. Anointing oils in alabaster jars leave slick residue on marble. Tassels of ceremonial staves, brush cloaks, a feathered reminder of rank. Embroidered gloves soften over time yet never lose their form. Metal goblets warm slowly, quiet heat from proximity to power. Velvet-lined boxes reveal seals and signets, their interiors plush and protective. Tactile sensations here aren't for comfort, they're cues of control. In a court where every texture speaks, softness often signifies strength, softer than steel, but stronger still. The torches gutter low, their embers folding into silent coils that cradle the hall in soft gloom. A hush settles as distant corridors release the last whispers of candlelit banquets and noble intrigue. Warm aromas of incense and spiced honey drift through the rafters, weaving a gentle tapestry of calm. Shadows lengthen, their embrace inviting eyes heavy with the promise of rest. Memory of vaulted chambers and velvet drapes recedes into a reverie of comfort and continuity. If you haven't yet fallen asleep, leave a comment below so I know who stayed up longer than I have. And let these whispered tales guide the mind into the quiet of midnight dreams.